Welcome to our special Provident webinar. This evening, we're going to take a step away from our standard format and engage in a candid conversation with various individuals about a topic that is deeply personal and often difficult: suicide and its impact on those left behind. We acknowledge that this discussion may evoke painful memories for some, and it's not our intention to cause distress. Our aim is to bring this important issue into the light, continuing the conversation with openness and sincerity. Our hope is that our listeners will gain a deeper understanding of this sensitive subject, recognize the signs in those around them, and learn proactive steps they can take if they encounter someone at risk of self-harm. Above all, we want to emphasize the importance of seeking help, both for others and oneself. So a couple of quick slides to go through before we jump into the program. And tonight, I want to focus my particular effort into the first responder assistance program that Provident offers its accident and health insurance clients. It's a helpline for heroes to help with PTSD and mental health services for first responders and their families. So your immediate family members have access to use the first responder assistance program as well. It's confidential support, offering you resources and referrals 24 hours, 7 days a week. Provides in-moment support with experienced behavioral health clinicians, and we have one of those people with us tonight. If you want to learn more about our FRAP program, you can go to providentins.com. Or if you need to use the number, you can call 855-207-1747. And I'm going to make this statement: even if you're not a Provident client, if you call that number and you need help, you'll get help. They're not going to turn you away simply because you're not a client of Provident. They'll get you the initial assistance you need to have. Our next webinar is on December the 16th with a retired fire officer from Fire Department in New York, and now the managing director of the First Responder Center for Excellence. And we'll be navigating through the current and emergency challenges in the fire service. Tonight with us, we have Joe Bonanno, a retired firefighter and a fitness trainer who's become a regular guest on our podcast, our webinars and podcast. Amy Gilliland from Western Pennsylvania, who hasn't joined us quite yet. We're hopeful she'll jump in. And then Abigail Tidwell, or Abby, who's a counselor at BHS, or Behavioral Health Systems, the people who manage our First Responder Assistance Program. So, Sam, you want to turn cameras back on?
Will do. All right, Joe, I asked you to, if you
Yep.
want. Okay, cool. If you want to, awesome.
All righty.
Perfect.
So, for those of you who are with us, you can see Sam there in the corner. I got to throw kudos out to Sam. He does all the marketing for this stuff, does all the work behind the scenes, helps me with the technical stuff when I get frustrated with it. I guess that's because he's much younger than I am. So I just want to kind of tip my hat to Sam tonight. So tonight I'm honored to introduce two individuals who've experienced the profound loss of a loved one to suicide. Amanda Gilliland and Joe Bonanno. They will share their introductions shortly. Before we delve into, I'm also thankful to have Abigail Tidwell from Behavioral Health Systems, or BHS, with us. BHS oversees the Provident First Responder Assistance Program, serving clients covered by our accident and health insurance plans. Before we delve into our discussion, I want to clarify that I am not a mental or behavioral health expert. However, I have sought guidance of professionals in this field multiple times through my career. While I'd never been suicidal, there were moments when life's challenges were overwhelming, and speaking to a professional was incredibly beneficial. It's not our goal to make you experts in mental health. Instead, we aim to equip you with knowledge about potential signs of crisis and empower you to offer support to those in need. And I'm going to switch up here just a little bit, so we'll see if Amanda joins us. So I'm going to go a little out of sync here. So in a recent podcast with Joe, we were talking about firefighter nutrition, and the conversation turned to this topic of suicide. We actually talked about that issue quite in depth. Listeners can find the podcast on various channels, and we'll provide a link to our Station 1902 podcast in the follow-up email. Joe, we went down the rabbit hole when we were talking about nutrition during a podcast, and I want you to take some time now to introduce yourself and tell your story about the loss of your loved one to suicide.
Yes, hello, all the listeners that are tuned in, and firefighters and civilians, or if you are listening. My name's Joseph Bonanno. I'm a 21-year veteran of the New York City Fire Department. I'm also a United States Air Force veteran. Joined the fire department in '79 and got out in just after 9/11. I was part of the rescue and recovery of after 9/11. That's a whole nother story for another day. And my brother Michael was also a New York City firefighter. He came with me. He was retired with a back injury at that time, but happened to be in New York when the planes hit the towers. And I won't elaborate on that story, but he wanted to go down there, and he asked me if I had any extra gear. So he came with me, and we were there the next day and for weeks doing search, rescue, and recovery at Ground Zero. He was married. He had a child, and he had some back injury earlier in his career at the Empire State Building, and he had to be retired. He couldn't work anymore, and he moved to Cleveland. Lived in a bunch of different places, and he moved to Cleveland with his wife and daughter. And in the summer of 2012, he he was struggling with, we had some family issues with my father. Without going into depth, everybody has personal problems that they're dealing with, but at no time did I ever think that suicide was in his wheelhouse of options to deal with family issues, personal issues, back pain. And we had many great conversations before that. So that's why it was so shocking. It's always shocking. Sometimes I guess less shocking when there's many signs there. But at no time did I ever think that he had this in his mind. And on July 31st of 2012, he dropped his daughter. It's hard to talk about, but he dropped his daughter off at school. Said, Daddy will be picking you up later. He drove to the Valley View Bridge. He parked his car. He took his cell phone with him. He walked 8 minutes to the highest point of the Valley View Bridge at 9 o'clock in the morning, climbed the fence, and jumped 300 feet down to, and not water either, he jumped to hard ground. And of course, the news went out and then I got the call at about 9:30. I was actually going to call him that morning, see how he was doing, because I had just spoken to him about 4 or 5 days before that. And he said, I'm doing all right, but, he had started earlier in his life. He had a little bit of a problem with alcohol. And he started drinking again. He said he was smoking pot for his back pain, and then he was taking antidepressants. So I don't know whether that medical cocktail caused it. I mean, a large percentage of the suicides are involved with, there is drugs and alcohol sometimes involved, a large percentage of them. I guess it gives them the liquid courage to do, but from what I understand, it was early in the morning, so I don't think he was drinking that morning. So to get a phone call like that, earlier in my career, I lost a firefighter named Tony Perella, committed suicide, and suicide is often filled with hypocrisy and irony, because when I got the call in 1989, when my friend killed himself, another firefighter I work with, we had planned a vacation together with me and a bunch of friends with this firefighter. And it was right, it was 2 days before St. Patrick's Day. We were going to march in the St. Patrick's Day parade. He had me in a headlock in the kitchen of the firehouse, this guy, and saying, "Oh, I can't believe we're going to go on vacation. And St. Patty's Day is Friday." And Thursday before St. Patty's Day, he put his car in the garage, duct taped all the seams. So he made sure that the smoke would, and he had a half a bottle of vodka in him, and he took his life. Now, when I got that phone call, my brother Michael was standing there. And, I had the phone to my ear, and he saw me turn white, and he goes, "Joe, what's the matter?" And I said, "Tony Perella just killed himself." And I collapsed in his arms crying. Now, here comes the hypocrisy and the irony. You saw the effect of what a suicide, that kind of loss, does to somebody. Yet 10 years later, you decide that you're going to do this yourself. But, I must have read 30 books about it. And from what I understand is when they've toyed with this idea of ending their life to end their pain, to end their complications, or whatever the mental reasons are. And then it's not that they're not aware that they're going to hurt people. I think the window just closes so tightly that the only option, yes, they'll understand. I don't know, maybe they justify it by saying they'll understand, they'll be okay. I doubt they said they don't care. It's just that I have to do this. And then once it's go time, I mean, many of the people that have committed to taking their lives, and the some that have actually survived because of circumstance, when they recovered from the injury from attempting to take their life. And I've talked to several firefighters out in San Francisco that, one guy shot himself in the head, but he didn't die from it. And then I asked him, and he said, the minute I did it, I was like, what the hell did I just do? And pretty much the people that attempted it and survived never tried it again. So it didn't become like this thing that I had. For that moment, it became the thing that I have to do. But once they did it, and by grace of God survived it, they said, what the heck was I thinking at that moment? I can't believe I got so far down, like you just said, the rabbit hole, that there was no coming out. And the only coming out was to take my life. And now they completely turned their lives around and do talks about it and stuff like that. But unfortunately, and when we were doing the nutrition talk, Chief, he was saying, like what, reach out, it's like a platitude, reach out and call somebody. He had his cell phone with him when he was walking, and he walked 8 minutes to the top of the bridge. And in 8 minutes, you didn't that's what and to this day, I still can't get over it. How do you not unthink it in 8 minutes? That's a long time.
Well, Joe,
and I'm not discounting what you said, Chief, about call somebody. He could have dialed my number and said, I'm at my wit's end. I'm at the Valley View Bridge, and I'm thinking, but when they decide, I believe, when they decide this is what I am going to do, it's almost like a mission statement. I'm going to complete the act. And yes, if somebody comes along and tackles them and gets them out of this state that they're in, maybe you can prevent it. But you can't turn that into guilt for yourself. Go ahead, Chief. I'll let you.
So I'm hopeful that we may be able to touch on some of that with Abby here. So I'm going to tell a story, and this was to set up our things for our guest with Amanda. But I'll tell you how Amanda and I got to know one another. So if she joins us, you all understand why I asked her to join us tonight. So July the 10th of last year, at 4:45, I got a telephone call from a gentleman by the name of John Englert, who was Amanda's father. And John and I worked with one another professionally when I was the state fire commissioner. John continued to work at the Bureau of EMS for the Department of Health. And I had submitted some classes to the Department of Health to get approved for continuing education for Provident. So John calls me, and John and I never drank with one another. We never broke bread with one another. Our relationship was always work related. So after a couple of minutes, John said, "Oh, by the way, we've approved your request for continuing education classes." And we talked with one another until about 10 minutes after 6. And the phone went dead, just cut off, like we dropped cell service. So I called John's number back 3 or 4 times and got no answer. I tried text messages and I got no answer. And the thing that concerned me was John had told me that he was getting ready to go the following week for an additional stent for a heart issue he was having. So I called the neighboring county's 911 center and asked them if they could send someone to go check on John. And that's a whole nother story. But after about 10 or 15 minutes, I got a telephone call from a police officer in the town of Bellefonte. And he asked me if I knew who John's landlords were and if there had been any change. And no, there was no change. And I didn't know who his landlords were. All I knew is that 2 women who had bought a lot of buildings in Bellefonte was his landlord. And the dispatcher said, "Well, do you have any idea where he lives?" I said, "Well, yeah, he lives on North Allegheny Street." He said, "Where?" I said, "Well, I can't give you an address, but if you turn right off of Bishop Street on that North Allegheny Street, it has to be the second or third door on your left. It would be handy to where Irv's Bar and Grill used to be." And this kid's that Irv's Bar and Grill, never heard of it. Well, this dispatcher was probably 25 years old, so I wouldn't have expected him to know it. So the cop called me back about 10 minutes later, said the fire department's here. We're going to take the door down. About 10, 15 minutes later, a police officer called me back, said, "I'm not sure how to tell you this." But I said, "Look, I've been around the business a while. Don't beat around the bush. What's up?" He said, "Well, he's deceased." And I asked him how. He said he shot himself. John had basically got up out of the chair he was sitting in while we were talking. There were 2 phones on a coffee table next to his chair. He walked to the other side of the living room, put a .308 to his chest, and pulled the trigger. I was pretty shook up. I played that conversation over in my head night after night, trying to think if John had said something that I missed. But at no time during our conversation did John ever speak poorly of anybody. He wasn't negative about any part of our conversation. We talked about the old days in EMS, because we both started in the 70s. We talked about the current day of EMS, the future of EMS if things didn't change. We talked about his pending retirement and the fact that he was going to be able to go home and spend more time with his family and his grandkids. Everything was positive. It shook me up enough that I called a friend of mine who called a friend of his who is a mental health specialist. And the statement made to me was, "Hey, look, Dave's had people in counseling before at 11 o'clock in the morning, and that afternoon they die from suicide. And he's a trained professional."
Right.
Well, it made me feel a little better, but I got to tell you, I didn't sleep well for a lot of nights because I just kept thinking, what did I miss? Did I miss something? So I found myself using our frat program. I wanted to talk to a professional just to kind of clear the air, if you will. The next morning, I got a text message from Amanda because I helped the police department in that part of Pennsylvania locate the family so they can make a notification. I get a text message from Amanda the next morning. And the part that I remember the most was, "We wish John would have seen himself as everybody else saw him, but he's been lonely and depressed for years. He's finally at rest." So there apparently were some signs that John was in distress. Now, I talked to other people. He was in a training meeting that day. No signs. He even made 2 telephone calls that day and scheduled appointments with people in other parts of the U.S. so they could get together and start writing a book on the history of EMS in Pennsylvania. I found out after the fact When the family went to his apartment, he had cleared all his clothes away in the closet, hung his service dress uniform in the middle of the closet above the safe with the safe open so they could find his important papers. When I went to his viewing, his sister said to me, you have to know the reason he called you was he knew you would know what to do. And it took me a couple of minutes and I still didn't understand. She said, look, he didn't want to lay in his apartment for days and no one know that something was wrong. He knew that you would call somebody to check on. So I don't want to make this all about me. That was how Amanda and I got to know one another. She has done several presentations across Pennsylvania about the warning signs that were there, but no one recognized them then. So that's how Amanda and I got to know one another. And if she joins us, we can get her to tell her story then. So, Abby, now that you've heard what Joe had to say and what I've had to say, introduce yourself and tell us about your role at BHS, please.
Yeah. Quick introduction. My name's Abby. I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I've worked in the mental health field for over 10 years. I've worked in a variety of settings, all the way in acute care in crisis management to more of an outpatient basis. I currently support BHS as a counselor for individuals like people through the FRAP program. So if someone reaches out through FRAP, they can be connected to me. And I've had the honor of, in my work, working with many first responders and just working with them as they navigate challenges like what you described, or even just the daily challenges that come from a really stressful job, which is what happens with first responders. And I know we will talk more about warning signs and all of that, but just hearing you and hearing Joe, I think that a focus that, and I think we'll touch on it at some point too, is focusing on what we're doing tonight, which is spreading awareness, talking about these things, normalizing conversations about mental health so that people don't feel the stigma that I think a lot of individuals feel, but maybe especially first responders when it comes to dealing with your mental health. And so I hope that us talking today can just spread some awareness and just lower that stigma even just a little bit. And we all can then go into our lives and talk to other people and continue to normalize mental health struggles because it happens. And if we continue to isolate, kind of like Joe was saying, you just feel like things are narrowing down more and more and more until you don't see any other way out, and you don't feel connection. You don't feel like you can reach out to someone else, and that's what can save lives.
So that's a good lead into my question for you, Abby, is having listened to what I had to say and what Joe's had to say, what insights can you offer about recognizing the warning signs or symptoms of someone that's contemplating suicide? I mean, I didn't see anything when I talked to John. I mean, it's not like he said, hey, I'm really struggling here, and it sounds like the same was true with Joe. I mean, there was no. So what should we be looking for? What can we look for?
Yeah. So I'll go over some warning signs. Of course, sometimes like they're not obvious, or they might be hard to see, or someone might be covering it up very strongly. And so that's where just normalize, even if you're a little bit worried about someone, just normalizing it in your family, with your friends, with your loved ones, having conversations about mental health. How are you doing? I really want to know. How are you feeling? Just kind of having that become part of day-to-day conversation in a meaningful way, I think can help when there aren't explicit warning signs, but to give people just an idea of warning signs that you really can look out for. And keeping in mind, if someone is displaying a few of these, it doesn't mean that someone's contemplating harming themselves, but it is something to to pay attention to. And if you notice them like speaking up and talking to the person about how you care about them and you want to help them, you're concerned. So common warning signs would be talking about the person, talking about feeling unbearable pain, talking about death, talking about feeling hopeless or worthless or trapped. Something that I hear and have read about a lot is feeling like a burden. And when people feel like a burden, that just leads them to further isolate, right? They don't want to reach out to other people and explain how they're feeling because they already feel like a burden. So if you hear anything like that, that can be something to pay attention to. Changes in behavior and mood. So increasing alcohol or drug use, increased sleep or not sleeping. So any kind of noticeable changes in that way, losing interest in things they used to really be passionate about, withdrawing, isolating, maybe not taking care of themselves the way that they used to, giving things away that are valuable or that they value, or just if it seems like they're really down, like even like getting ahead of it, like saying, hey, you seems like you're having a hard time, I love you, I'm here for you, and just again starting that dialogue. So those are just some of the warning signs. Oh, also recklessness. So like if they're engaging in maybe more reckless or risky behaviors than they normally wouldn't do that, that's another thing to look out for. Oh, I think you're muted, Ed.
So Joe, how about sharing your thoughts on, were there any warning signs? Were there things that you know now you wish you would have known beforehand? I mean,
Well, believe me, I've gone group counseling. Jeff Dill from www.ffbha.org. He was amazing helping me. He has a wonderful organization, and he really helped me a lot. And even private in the Tampa Bay area, there was some suicide support groups, non first responder, just right, so that was one of the first things I knew, is to go into a group and speak with other people who've experienced this. And it's all horrible. But now you're asking me like the signs, which, and I think Abigail kind of verified it for me, that, one of the first things people ask you who are unschooled in this is, well, why? Why did he take his life? Oh, well, he was, whoever it is, oh, he's getting a divorce. Well, does that mean that everybody that's getting a divorce takes their life? Oh, he was having financial problems. Everybody that has financial problems doesn't take their life. Got in trouble at work. First responded, did screwed up at a fire or something like that and couldn't take a door, whatever. But not everybody that screws up at work takes their life. So I don't know that there's a universal, like, to me, that wasn't even that's why it was so shocking to me. And it really took me down like really bad. That I just never, thought that he would have that as an option, and again, he lost his, I don't like the platitude, it's a permanent solution to a temporary problem, which really basically what it is. But divorce, work-related problems, financial issues, personal family issues, pretty much they're all temporary. But, and that's why what I've learned from it is to never say, and even towards the end of my career there, I would never say to a firefighter, like, what's the big deal? The captain's a pain in the neck and he wrote you up for something. I would never say to someone, because what's a big deal to you and what's a big deal to me is two different things. Now, the two expressions I link to suicide is the veritable straw that broke the camel's back, because it took one more thing, and that could be the most minor thing, and then the biggest one I see that I talk about, and I always try to talk to people about perspective, is making a mountain out of a molehill. Getting a divorce is horrible. If it was the love of your life and she cleaned out all your bank accounts and took your house, yeah, it's terrible. And I'm not saying these things don't, excuse the language, suck. They do. getting in trouble at work, financial issues, foreclosure, family issues. Yeah, of course they do, but compared to what? And I think the people who get it in their head to end their life make a mountain out of what basically is a molehill, 10, 15 years from now. You might be remarried to somebody else and ecstatically happy. And you say, thank God I got divorced. You would have drove me completely crazy, But so in other words, at that moment in time, if they can capture that and say it's not. So like you said, warning signs, I really struggle with that because my friend at the Ladder 129, no way was he. We had a vacation planned. He kept himself. He was physically fit. He loved working out. So he's, so you're concerned about your body, but not so concerned that you decide to put your car in the garage and take your life. So I just think at some point, but you just said it, Ed. You were shocked also, Chief, that your friend took his life, and he just got off the phone with you. But believe me, he thought about it before. He didn't just get off the phone with you and walk over and pick up a rifle and shoot himself.
And that, go ahead, Joe. I'm sorry.
Yeah, he and I believe me, I've talked to so many people, civilians and first responders. Did you see anything, like one of the civilian people here in the Tampa Bay area went to a support group, and he said his son hung himself in the bathroom, and he had to actually pull him down and take him down, and of course it was horrible and all that. And then when he looked on his laptop, he found months and months of research. How long does it take when you asphyxiate yourself with a rope? What kind of knot should you use? How long do you have to hang there? So he researched it. So it was well planned, and just like your friend there, it was well planned. Now, my brother Michael, I don't know and that's the other part you struggle with. One of his best friends talked to him on Sunday. He said he sounded great. Now, I don't know that on Sunday he said, "Yep," and it happened on a Tuesday. I don't know that on Sunday he said, "Yep, Tuesday morning, drop my daughter off at work, and I'm going here, and I'm going to take a leap off this bridge." Or if he thought about it 3 weeks before. But he knew where the bridge was, knew how to get there. I don't know. I don't know if he researched it, but believe me, he thought about it.
Well,
and that's, go ahead.
And that's what I discovered after John died, was talking to friends and family, finding out that everything appeared to be great at work that day. But I found out that previous weekend he was supposed to go to a picnic. He called the people and said, "I'm not coming. I don't feel well." Conversations he had with Amanda, and things I picked up after the fact that didn't present themselves during our conversation. So to your point, Joe, John had a plan. Okay. Now, Abby, you may be able to help us with this, and this isn't in the script. So some of the research I've done, and I don't remember what the percentage is, but a large number or there are a number of people who commit suicide, die from suicide, that it's a spur of the moment thing. There is no plan. It's just, that's it. I'm done. Is there any truth to that, or does everybody go through planning for this?
So I don't know the exact statistic that you're referencing. I think it depends on, yes, I think it can happen spontaneously, but I think generally that is related to someone who maybe it's not depression they're suffering from, it's something else that is leading them to, and I don't want to throw out diagnoses or get too clinical, but there are diagnoses where you are more your mood is more labile, you're more all over the place, and you can act more unpredictably. And so I think that that is possible, but at the same time, there still would probably be some kind of indicator that person might be acting erratically. They might be, you would probably be able to sense that something was a little off. It might not be the warning signs I read off exactly, but that something is off about them.
So again, you know, my first encounter with a mental health expert was in 1979 in Okinawa. Okay. I was in the military, and look, some folks on here know this. I served as the state fire commissioner for 14 and a half years. And when they make the statement, it's lonely at the top, it is. Okay. It is. Because I didn't come home and share negative things with my family. I didn't share, you know, I'd bitch about the budget to my staff, but I didn't tell them things that were really eating at me. But while I was in Okinawa, there were a lot of things that went on, things that took place at home with my parents, and then on the job, and then a relationship. And I realized myself, I wasn't me. Okay. I mean, and the straw that broke the camel's back for me is we were on a fire department exercise, and I kicked a Dutch door off the hinges because it wouldn't stay open. And then the one civilian, the nicest guy on my shift, all right, Mr. Takamini, wasn't moving fast enough for me. And I grabbed him by the collar of his fire coat and started dragging him through the building. And I knew then that isn't me. And I made an appointment and went and met Lieutenant Jane Gaffney. I'll never forget her. Blonde hair, blue eyes. And when she first started to try to get me to open up, I wouldn't say anything to her. And she kept needling me. And all of a sudden, I pounded her desk and called her a bitch. Excuse my language. And then I just let go of the torrent. And she sat there grinning the whole time. But I tell that, I guess, I mean, it's kind of like, I like to compare it to kind of like a sponge. You just keep soaking stuff up. Okay. You're a first responder. You see all kinds of crap. You see the worst in people. You see the worst in the world. And then maybe, you know, and if you're a volunteer, you know, then you have a full-time job and you got a boss that you don't get along with, or a coworker you don't get along with. Your spouse is nagging you about something. Finances are tight. And all this stuff just keeps getting soaked up in that sponge. And sooner or later, you got to find a way to wring the sponge out. So you either have a hobby or you go talk to somebody, but you find a way to wring that sponge out. And to your point earlier, I think the more we talk about this with people and remove the stigma, more people will be willing to talk about it and seek out help if they need it. You know, maybe that's just pie in the sky with me. I'm hoping that's what happens. Joe, I see you're itching to say something.
Yeah, I am, because you know, this is good therapy for me too, actually. I really found one universal thing in the people who have taken their life is the and I distinctly remember saying this to my brother Michael in a phone call previous to what happened. When did you lose your firehouse sense of humor? You know, so all of a sudden nothing's funny anymore, nothing. And now they've gone into the serious world of, like, they can't find humor in anything, which pretty much that's what a lot of times they call it, gallows humor in the fire service.
Yeah.
You know, and it's evident on the TV show MASH, if anybody's watched MASH. Here they are cutting up 18-year-old kids and they're goofing around. And it's their way of lightening the stress of what they're going through. And then, yeah, and like you said, Chief, it is like a sponge. It starts to get absorbed. Listen, I should be the PTSD poster child. My mother died in a fire when I had a year on the job. She was burned 55% third-degree burns. And she died in front of me and my brother Michael in the hospital. All right, so I had that on my plate. Then 9/11, and now my brother's suicide. Now, am I the pillar of strength? No, but I knew enough to go to hell. But you know, I have to be honest, and I'll share this with people. I'm not afraid to share it. When my mother died, after she died, I said, I'm starting my career on the fire service. I was working when my mother was caught in a fire. I can't, you know, I was struggling with that. And I said, you know what? How am I ever going to be happy again? Ever? Talk about losing your sense of humor, you know? And yes, I plodded through work and I started thinking to myself, you know what? If I'm never going to be happy again, what's the point of living? You know, what's the point? So That's what I think starts to happen. This formulation process happens. So if anybody that's listening, firefighters that are listening, and a lot of the suicide, I feel, my opinion, I'm not a professional like you, Abby, I'll defer to you. It's anger based. I got divorced. I'm so PO'd. My wife's taking the house away from me. I'm getting foreclosed because I didn't, or the town building permit is writing me up for whatever. I am so angry. And then, like I said, I'm angry at getting divorced. I'm angry at financial woes. I'm angry. Then you go to work and the captain gives you a hard time or writes you up, and now you're angry at work. Now you're angry all the time. And they really say that suicide is self-murder. You want to kill somebody. You're so angry, and you know it's not in your I want to use the word wheelhouse, but it's not of your personality to kill your captain or your lieutenant. And this anger just starts building, and you go, you know what? I'm going to take it out on myself and self-murder. I mean, that's one of the things I read about it. It's self-murder. I can't, and I truly believe, and I don't want to disrespect my father like that. He had some issues with my father, who was also a New York City fireman. I had issues with him too. We disconnected years ago, and my father remarried, and he didn't want to even bother with my brother Michael. And he said it to me. He said, Joey, it's like somebody put a howitzer cannon to my heart. And then I truly believe he said, you know what? Wait till my father hears about this. This is really going to get him. This is my way of getting him back. So I'm turning all that anger towards my father. I'm turning it inside, ending my life. And boy, he's gonna have to live with this for the rest of his life. And one of my last tours on the New York City Fire Department, I went to a suicide in College Point, Queens. A family was arguing at the kitchen table, teenage boy arguing with his father, typical rebellious teenager and arguments you get in. And he went up into the bed, they screamed and yelled at each other. The mother tried to calm them down. He went up into his bedroom. He went up into the upstairs bathroom. The father chased him upstairs. He locked the door. And the father knocked the door, open this damn door. And he goes, goodbye, Dad. Boom. And he blew his head off. So his last act was like, I am going to stick at you. You've been, driving me crazy. I can't stand you. And I'm going to fix you. So I believe it's anger based. And listen, I was angry that I wasn't angry at my mother. I was angry at my father. I was angry that I had to have a loss like this in my life. And I started to. And that's where I think you could see that people are in trouble. One is the loss of the sense of humor. And the other two things I believe is, and Jeff from FFBHA will talk about this. Do you have a plan? So what I see is loss of sense of humor is a big sign, because comedy gets us through some of the stuff we see as first responders. Nothing's funny anymore. And next thing is they said, I could always end my life if none of this other stuff works out. My divorce, my foreclosure, my financial woes, issues. And if none of this works out, I could always take my life. That's step one. Step two, excuse me, I get worked up about this. Step two is I take my life, and this is how I'm going to do it. So now they've implemented it becomes, well, I say it's an option. You got a bunch of options. You get divorced, it could work out. You could work things out with it, maybe go for therapy, get divorced, maybe meet somebody new, whatever. Those things can work out. But then they start saying, if that doesn't work out, I could always take my life. And they might be just bouncing the idea around. If people start thinking I could take my life and this is how I'll do it. Like Chief said, his friend shot himself. My brother jumped off of a bridge. Now they have two things going. They have no sense of humor, a plan, and how not only are they thought that this is an option, it's also, this is how I'm going to do it. So now you kind of have the thing in place. So let's say they say, you know what, everything could work out. I could win the lottery. My financial woes would be gone. But option 30 is, you know what, if none of this ever works out and things even get worse, I could always take my life. But now other things may not work out. That's just life. Now all of a sudden it's option 20. Now it's option 15. And then you say, all right, I'll just go out and date. My wife, whatever. And you get rejected by a few girls dating and something. And the next thing you know, you're like, now it's option 5. And now it's getting closer to, and now all you need is straw that broke the camel's back. One more thing. I mean, I read an article by a woman. This kind of, I guess maybe people can relate to it. things were like that. It was an option for her to take her life. And then she said, I'd shoot myself because she was a retired police officer. And she said, things got so bad that literally, if I went in the other room and I spilled a glass of milk, I would go in the other room, take the gun and shoot myself. And you say, what, spilled a glass of milk? But she said the spilling of the milk represented how everything in my life is going right now. Now, you and I are in a better place. We could spill a glass of milk and you're going to get a sponge and you clean it up. But in her mind, that's how she manifested it. This is just the way my life is going to go. You know? So the big sign, like, I think you're intimating to me, like, what can we look for in first responders that we work with, or friends, family, and whoever we care, concern, and love for, is look for the no sense of humor. And then I don't think it's out of, you know, we as first responders have to worry about job security. So you're not going to go to your captain or your lieutenant or your chief and say, Chief, you know what? I'm in the middle of like a family crisis and I'm thinking of taking my life. It's not going to happen because he's always going to worry about losing his job. And then you don't know, you're a professional, Abigail. The chief isn't a professional. He might be some hardcore South Bronx lieutenant. What do you mean you're going to take your life? I'll kick your ass right now if you want. You know what I mean? He may not be understanding about it. Maybe that's not the word he needed right there. He doesn't need a pat on the back and, give me a big hug or whatever. And, I was telling the chief, I want to get back to doing seminars, exercise, nutrition, but also I want to do PTSD because I've experienced it myself with my brother. I mean, it's one thing to give a speech to somebody who never lost somebody to that. And I would be willing to bet if I had a class of 600 people, now I'm a firefighter just like them. And I was like, listen, everybody, I'm on the same level you are. Here's what my background, is anybody in this room thinking of committing suicide? If 600 firemen, not one of them is going to raise their hand. Not one. But I'd be willing to bet there's 2 or 3 that are having some crisis going on and have actually, it's option 20. And if it's option 20, if I was going to do it, I would, jump off a bridge, shoot myself, take pills, carbon monoxide, whatever they've thought about. But they're never going to, they may come over to me afterwards and say, I'm glad you talked to me about that. Listen, can I just talk to you one-on-one, just me and you? But they're not going to raise their hand and say, yeah, I thought about it. You're not going to get one.
So Abby, you've heard to both of us. So let me throw this question at you. So if we suspect that a loved one, a friend, a colleague is in crisis, what advice do you give us? I mean, what should an individual do, whether you're a friend, the family member, the fire chief, the captain, the lieutenant? What do we do? I mean, when you see some of the warning signs, the guy's humor disappears and they don't come around the firehouse anymore, or they've lost interest in the things they've done. What do we do? What do you recommend that people do?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of what we touched on earlier, but I think talking to that person, like going to them in a private setting and saying, hey, I really care about you. I feel like you seem like you're not feeling like yourself. I've noticed X, Y, and Z. I noticed that you don't really have your sense of humor. You're not coming around. We don't see you anymore. I'm worried about you. Like, I want to be there for you. Are you okay? Also, if you have any suspicion they might be thinking about harming themselves, you can directly say, like, are you thinking of hurting yourself? Are you thinking of trying to harm yourself? Because I think there's this fear that if we say it to someone, then it will make them think about it more, but it actually can be very relieving for the person to be seen in that way and to have kind of that pressure off of them, that secret of like, it's something that's been on their mind and they feel supported. And so you can say that. And if they say that they are thinking about hurting themselves, then staying with them, connecting them to resources. If they have an active plan, like reaching out to, like bringing them to the emergency room, whatever you can do to get them that immediate support. If they are having we will call like passive thoughts. So they're thinking about it, but they don't have an active plan, like staying with them, getting them connected to a mental health provider, calling the frat line, like they can help. They're answering phone calls 24/7, just getting them connected to some kind of support, and then staying with them, checking in on them. I think it's something that we've touched on where that lack of connection can make them feel worse and worse. It can make anyone feel worse and worse. You know, if you're not feeling your best, if you're feeling down and then you isolate, you're gonna feel worse and worse. And that's kind of what can keep happening. And so having other family members, you know, providing support, loved ones, just really like rallying around the person in a non-judgmental, comforting way of, you know, we're here for you. We love you. And so that would be my recommendation, is just facing it head on. And again, like continuing to like destigmatize mental health and these struggles.
Yeah, Abigail, I see somebody named Hank just put a response up, and he thanked you for saying to just ask, because it's a powerful word, suicide. But my advice to first responders who are listening, and even civilian people, listen, you can't trust everybody to share something as personal and deeply disturbing as that. But trust me, in a crew of 50, that's how many were in my firehouse, there was always a half a dozen to a dozen guys that you could do that with. Yeah, there's a couple of meatballs that you're not going to be able to talk to about it. God forbid you even said that to somebody. But there's always going to be somebody, and that's what I say, find that sympathetic person. That and yes, you're 100% right. I'm at that stage now where if I met somebody, I'm like, listen, have you put suicide as an option to this mess that you're in? And most people are going to get out. You know, oh no, I would never. I'm pretty sure if I would have said that to my brother, a matter of fact, 2 months before it happened, I was in my living room screaming at him on the phone because he was complaining about this family situation. And I remember I lost my stuff with him because I said, we had enough tragedy in this family. We don't need another tragedy. And he goes, well, you don't understand. You're not married. And if you were, blah, 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 and I go, I went through 9/11. So did you. I went through everything you went through. We both lost our mother. We both had, and I've had relationship problems too. I've had all of that. But at no time did I, and I said to him at one time when we lost our mother, it was on my list. And I said, thank God the opportunity didn't present itself to me. So I said, but we don't need another. So yeah, he said, no, he didn't say, don't worry, I'm not going to, I would never do something like that. I don't remember saying, and maybe that in itself is a sign.
Well,
maybe at that time he might have said, if I would have been point blank with him, and I said, we don't need another tragedy. If I would have said, hey, Michael, listen, I hope that suicide is not an option, because you are going to, you don't know how many people you're going to wreck, myself included, if you do something like that.
And that kind of goes to what Abby said, is trying to being sympathetic and not judgmental. And I think sometimes with a family member, it can be difficult not to be judgmental. It's a little harder sometimes to be sympathetic. One thing I've learned through all this is, especially with first responders, is you have to make sure you're talking to somebody that understands first responders. Okay. It doesn't have to be somebody that rode a fire truck or fought fire, but somebody that's worked with first responders. Because let's face it, between first responders and the military, there's a lot of stuff that we see on top of just the day-to-day living, that the average human being never sees in a lifetime. And 2 weeks after John died from suicide, I get a telephone call from an individual because he was diagnosed with cancer, and he was asking me if I could help him navigate how to file a cancer presumption claim. And I give him the information, and near the end of the conversation, he says to me, I get really lonely sometimes with having this cancer. Well, what do you think the next question was for me after what I went through with John? And it was, hey, do I have to worry about you hurting yourself? And he went, what's the matter with you, Ed? Are you crazy? I said, no. Let me share with you what happened to me 2 weeks ago. Okay. So all I'm saying to you is if you ask that question and they say yes, you better know what you're going to do next. And sometimes you got to get yourself educated on what to do next. Being sympathetic, not letting them alone,
Staying calm too can be like, if someone does say yes, like, which I know everyone here is very good at staying calm in stressful situations, but just allowing that person to say how they're feeling. And then, like you said, like knowing the next steps, like is it going to be calling 911? Is it going to be going in the emergency room? Is it going to be calling 988? What would be the next step?
So go ahead, Joe.
Well, again, I say, yes, seek out professional, but in the world of first responders, it might be, we consider ourselves professionals at everything. It's go around the kitchen table and there's always somebody that knows how to do plumbing, carpentry, electric, blah, blah, blah. And then we also think, well, we could figure this out too. And that can-do attitude can get you in trouble, because this is not an area that I'm an expert at, and nobody at the kitchen table in a firehouse is an expert at. So, and it's a really, again, that's why I say go to somebody. You can't trust everybody that you work with for this kind of information anyway, but there is somebody, and seek out that guy. And you might not say, and then that guy has to be able to say, if people are listening, has to say, listen, this is how I would word it. I understand that you're going through some, whatever it is, family, financial, personal, whatever. Have you considered taking your life as an option if none of this works out? That's how I would word it. And they would say, you know what? It's funny you say that, because, I can't see living the rest of my life without her. I can't see living the rest of my life with a record on my work, something that I did, then you got to say, well, okay, then let's talk about it. Now you've just shared with me that it's an option. Let me ask you, now I'm going to ask you the deeper question. You made it an option. Have you thought about how you would do it? And if they turn around and say to you, yeah, I have a gun at home, or I would take, I go, now I'm going to tell you flat out, you're in trouble. I'm not turning you in. I'm not going to get you in trouble. I'm your friend. I care about you. I love you. I don't want to see anything happen to you. And the world is going to be a much more terrible place without you in it. That's the way I like to word it to people. You're valuable as a firefighter. You're valuable as a person. You may not think you are because you're getting divorced, or somebody broke up with you, or you have financial woes, or somebody at work is really riding you really bad. And then you always have to think options. And that was one of the things I learned at the civilian place I went to in Tampa Bay, civilian support group. That's what they were saying, that a lot of people, one of the women there, it was a professional counselor, and the girl had gotten pregnant, and she was raised in a really strict family. She was going to take her life because she saw no other option other than taking my life. And the guy, counseled her, and he said, you can put the baby up for adoption. You can raise it yourself. There's options. Don't think that there's no options.
So that kind of leads to the next question. And that's, what should leadership be doing in fire stations, ambulance stations, to take support for first responders in the community to reduce the incidents? What should fire chiefs be doing? What should EMS chiefs be doing in a leadership role now? And Abby, I'll throw that to you first.
Yeah, so I think one is like what FRAP is doing. So having like some kind of assistance program where people can call in 24/7 confidentially, and the service is free, and just get that immediate help. They don't have to go through insurance and try to find a therapist and go through, because that's a barrier. And so I think that's one thing, having that more available. I think encouraging regular mental health check-ins. So I don't think we would need, they don't have to be required, but having some kind of standard of like every year, everyone gets a check-in. It's not a test. It's not something to try to weed people out or figure out things. It's like purely a safe place for someone to go and just check in on how they're doing and connect them with services if they could use some more support. I think also, and I'm sure that this exists in a variety of ways, but having like very strict safety protocols following a distressing event. So having everyone who went through, which I know there's a lot of distressing events, but like having some kind of protocol there to check in with people, have them talk to others that experienced a similar thing, and just having that connection again, that I think is so important when people are struggling. And also kind of what Joe was saying too, I think if there's a way to have like trained peers so that there's someone in the firehouse or a few people that are trained peers that you can go to them if you're thinking of harming yourself, or if you're not feeling like yourself, they're trained, but they're still a peer, and you can talk to them and they can kind of help walk you through that. So I think that's an important thing that could be.
I know the International Association of Firefighters is very big on peer support, in a lot of career departments across the U.S. and I've actually heard some pretty positive stories from people that have been involved with peer support. Joe, I know after September the 11th, but was there peer support available for FDNY prior to September the 11th?
Well, I have a kind of a funny story about that, because when my friend Tony back in '89 took his life, and you talk about hypocrisy, we were dealing with another firefighter that was dying of cancer, was only 33 years old, and I had to go to Sloan Kettering, and they were friends too. I had to go to Sloan Kettering and tell this guy that's dying of cancer that this firefighter took his life. And he's like, I'm dying of cancer. Talk about it. He goes, why didn't he just change places with me? The hypocrisy of it. So I think I lost my train of thought here. What were you asking me again, Chief?
So prior to September the 11th, did FDNY have peer support they do?
So where I was going with the story is when that firefighter in '89 took his life, yeah, we had somebody from the counseling services unit come to our firehouse. Now, I like the mantra, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. So counseling service unit said, come on, we got to get everybody in the kitchen, Lieutenant, everybody in the kitchen. And, he wanted to go around the room. Hey, how you feeling about losing your friend, Tony? Hey, we weren't like, I remember him asking me, I'm like, nah, I'm okay. Yeah, went to his funeral. Yeah, I'm all right though. I wasn't ready until I had a grievous loss personal. It was grievous, but it wasn't as grievous as losing my brother later in my life. But so you have to be ready to accept the information. It's just like we talked about fitness and nutrition. Somebody wants to get in shape, all of a sudden finds gym equipment there. They're chock full of getting information. So that's where I say the person has to be ready to hear this information about getting help. So for a chief to come into a firehouse and say, listen, everybody in the kitchen, we're going to have a talk about mental health right now. Again, I don't think one guy there is going to turn around and say, yeah, Chief, I'm in the middle of a divorce and I've toyed around with the idea. He's not. He's just not going to do it. He may do it with his peers. So that's why I said peer. Abigail used the word peer support. That's more. But again, and I'm not against the chief coming in and saying that. And you asked if the FDNY after 9/11. No, I didn't get. Yeah, we had a normal checkup, and then they do a mental health, just like fill out 4 or 5 sentences and how are you feeling today? Have you had any thoughts of suicide? No. Whether that's helping or not, I don't know. And that's where support groups, where Jeff was great with FFBHA. So I don't know that there's a forced intervention that's going to make somebody that's contemplating suicide come clean with it. Maybe a seminar where somebody like myself, and I'm not promoting myself, but somebody like myself who has gone through it and said, hey, listen, and if any firefighters here are listening, listening to this dissertation that we're doing here, and they're on the other side of this, and they say, I'm listening to this, but I have toyed around and I have thought about it. And if you think I have this powerful message to them. If you think you're making some bold statement to get back at your father because he didn't treat you right, or to get back at a captain, they're going to go to your funeral, they're going to cry a few tears, and they're going to move on with their life. So you're not hurting them, you're hurting yourself, and you don't even realize the amount of other people that care about you that you're going to hurt. The massive wave of grief that comes from it. And is that the way, if I had to talk to my brother, I says, is that the legacy you want? And I'm putting this out there to any firefighters that are listening that have toyed with this idea. And if you want to reach me personally through the chief, go ahead, email me. I'll call you personally and we'll talk for hours about it. But is this the legacy? People look at you like a superhero when you're a first responder. And that's a lot of responsibility. What did he say in Spider-Man? With great power comes great responsibility. So you have a responsibility to everybody that you care about. And if you end your life like that, you can hear me getting choked up. Is that the legacy that you want to leave with your job, with people that know and love you? So get it. My thing is, get it off your option list. It ain't even option 100. It's never an option, ever.
My point about the leadership is, and Joe, I completely understand and agree with you. When I was a fire chief and an assistant chief in the military, if I called everybody together and said, hey, look, we're going to sit down here and we're going to debrief what we just dealt with, you're absolutely right. Very few people would speak up. What I would like to see the leadership be doing, though, is making sure that their people understand that here's where you can get help. And you need not worry about us jamming you up unless, of course, whatever it is interfering with your ability to do your job physically. Okay. We're not going to jam you up. And look, I can remember the first time I talked to some old school guys when I was a youngster and dealt with something that was really ugly and traumatic. When I asked them about it, you know what they told me to do? Suck it up, Buttercup. It'll get better. And I think we're slowly stepping away from that. And leadership is finally realizing that it's okay to, it's okay to tell your people it's not okay not to be okay. It's okay not to be okay. But here's where you can get help. And we're going to support you through this journey if we have to. And it has to be sincere. And sometimes, I have a 2.5 hour class I do on PTSD suicide awareness. Why did I do it? I kind of figured with someone that's been in the business as long as I was, having been a volunteer fire chief, being the state fire commissioner for all those years, if I was willing to share my journey using the mental health system over those years, it might be just enough to break down the barriers that one person in that class would decide, hey, if that guy is making those phone calls, so can I. That's what I'm expecting from leadership. Okay.
Yeah.
Reassuring your people that help's available. And if the support mechanism is there to help you through this. And I think we're slowly turning the corner in the fire service, that more leadership has kind of taken that approach, that we're not going to use it as punishment because you appear to be weak. You can't be weak. You're a firefighter, by God, you can't be weak. So I think we're slowly turning the corner there. I don't have any statistics to support that, but
Well, by the time you have 5, 10, 15 years in your career, no matter where you work in the world, in the first responder world, you're going to see some stuff. And you're probably going to be wounded. You're going to get cut. You might have a broken bone. You're going to have some form of physical injury at some point in your career. There's just no getting around it. You might have a burn. You might have a broken bone. You might have even more serious. But what they're not telling you is by the time you get 5, 10, 15 years on, you're also wounded mentally. You're wounded. And they go, well, I'm not wounded. Yeah, you are. You just don't see the wound yet. And I'm not saying you're going to have a breakdown. I'm not saying you're eventually going to, with 15 years plus 20 years, you're going to have it. You may never. You may never. And God bless you if you don't. But you are wounded in some. Jeff Dill, when he does this, I did a seminar with him here in Clearwater. That's what he said. If you're a first responder, you have PTSD. Period. What level of it, where it's going to cost you taking your life or any? No, but you have some form of it, because just like doing 5, 10, 15 years, you're going to have stitches, a broken bone, cuts, bruises, burns. Something's going to happen to you. It's a physical job, but it's also a mental job, and you're wounded. How badly? I don't know. Let's talk. And that's where you throw it out there. Okay, you're wounded, but let's talk about it. And if a guy says, you know what, I don't want to talk about it, I'm okay. All right.
And I think too, what's beginning to happen is even in recruit schools now, we're talking about it in recruit schools. Okay. I mean, we're addressing the elephant in the room, even in recruit schools now. We're letting recruits know, look, this isn't all sunshine, folks. Some of you are going to struggle with mental issues as a result of some of what you see. And that's okay. But in this department, there's support for you. And this is what you can do. And I think fire departments are doing a better job of telling the truth in recruit school, in the basic fire schools. Well, Joe, I mean, I know when I took my first firefighting class in the 70s, mental health, what's that? There was no discussion about mental health in
No.
any recruit school I ever went to. But I think the fire service as a whole, and even the EMS, is doing a better job of talking about it now than we ever did before. So just so you see, Amanda joined us. And Amanda, I'm sorry you've been sick all day. You don't have to put your camera on, but if you want to take a couple of minutes and talk about the lessons you learned after your dad took his life by suicide and share it with the group, please feel free to do so. I don't want to put you on the spot if you've been sick all day.
No, I totally understand, and I apologize for my voice. Hopefully it'll get better as the time goes on, and I apologize that I am late.
That's okay.
I have been totally out of it for the last 2 days. So the lessons that I learned after, I would say there are things that I learned about my dad that he struggled with that I didn't know. And I guess I wish I would have had the opportunity to know, because I would have done everything in my power to try to get him to get some help. But I think it's also kind of what we discovered through notes that he left is that it was a cumulative thing. It was not just one thing. It was kind of one thing on top of the other. And something that I feel probably is common in this field is you're used to being the helper. You're used to being the one that provides the help. And I saw through his writings that, he was even that to our family. He was the oldest of all of the men in the family. And he wrote about not wanting to give that up, to kind of like, he wanted to remain in that quote unquote good light with our family, that he could continue to help everyone else with their issues. But if he let his guard down and let other people know what he was struggling with, how would they feel about then coming to him? Ed, you're on mute.
I know. Uh, I know how he felt. I'm the oldest of my brothers, you know. Every time something went wrong in the family, it was, hey, big brother. You know, when my dad died, what are we going to do next? When my mom started to struggle with dementia, it was, hey, big brother. Uh, so, uh, yeah, I can understand how you feel that way about your dad. Uh, and you know, I'm going to throw something out here that I think compounded the issue for a lot of people, and that was when we all went remote for work. Okay. Because now I was fortunate, I had several years of working with Provident remote before, but when you think about you work in an office setting your entire career, you got friends around you every day, you're able to, you know, laugh and giggle and have a good time and make jokes and go to lunch with one another. And now 5 days a week, you're remote. You don't have that togetherness anymore. You don't have that feeling of being around that support system every day. And I think that has had an impact on some people. Amanda?
Yeah, I agree with that. I know I did put in the chat that that was one of the things on my dad's lists cumulatively, that he was lonely or he felt alone. And dad had moved to Belfont to be halfway between work and home because my grandmother's 91 years old. And again, he was always the one that took care of everyone. So if somebody got sick or something went wrong, it was always dad to the rescue. He was very secluded whenever it came to COVID because not only was he 2.5 hours from work, but he was 2.5 hours from the rest of us as well. And he didn't have a significant other. And he was and anyone that knew my dad would totally shake their heads yes to this. He was so by the book that, like, he's like, you know what? I cannot see, and you are laughing because you do know. He would not want to put anyone at risk. He wasn't taking any chances. So he secluded himself, and I found notes that he wrote, and it's awful to even think about them because he wrote, for Christmas one year, the poor man was by himself, and I was so much in my own world that I didn't think about that. And those are the things that really, him expressing his feelings on paper has been truly the greatest gift that I could have received after this, because it doesn't make me understand why, but it makes me understand why we're here. And to see his perspective, there's a guilt that has set in with me, because these are the things that I wish he had communicated so that it just entered my brain.
Amanda, you all right?
Yeah, I'm okay.
Okay.
I'm okay.
That's all right.
Yeah. Hi, Amanda. You mind if I speak?
No, go ahead.
Yeah, hi, Amanda. This is Joe. I think we spoke on the phone once.
Yes, we
Um,
did.
Yeah, the guilt thing. Listen, I struggled with that a lot too. And one of the support groups I went here in Tampa, you know, people say, if only I was there, if only I would have said the right thing, if only there's a lot of if onlys that go with it. But the one woman there and she was very powerful the way she said it. She was one of the counselors, and she said, listen, if you short circuited it at one point and they were hell bent on doing this, they were going to complete the mission. And you can't be you say, look, I'll just go over and sit on their chest 24 hours a day, 7 days a week till this passes. And you just can't. You can't sit on somebody's chest 24 hours a day if they're held. I'm not saying allow them to do this. And that's what the chief and I were speaking about, is you have to get them to bring it out and to talk to you and eliminate the fact that you can't have this as an option. It's just going to completely ruin everybody. You just got to get this off your option list. I mean, that's about the only thing you can say, because other than that, to lock them up and think that they're not going to, in a support group that I went to, that's what this woman did. She locked her son in a room every night thinking she was going to prevent it. And when he finally found a way to get out, he completed the act and took his life. And she says, oh, what, I couldn't believe it. I went out for 5 minutes he was hell-bent on doing it, and no disrespect to my brother, no disrespect to anybody, your father and anybody that has completed this. It's not in it is verbally and speaking with them if they want to allow it. But other than that, we can't sit on their chest. Listen, the morning my brother took his life, I was going to call him that morning. The phone didn't have enough of a charge on it. I plugged the phone in to charge it. And I went out to the store quick to get some eggs. I came back and there was a message from my friend saying what happened. And I said, oh my God, why did I charge the phone? If I would have just called the phone, he was probably just parking his car where he was going to do it. And I could have prevented it. And I don't know that. We're never going to get to know that until we get to the pearly gates. And there's a certain amount of anger that comes with this. We're mad at the people for doing this. That was my first reaction. How could you do that to us after what we've been through? That was my first reaction to this. How could he do this to us? We'd lost our mother. We went through 9/11. How could you do this? But you have to understand that they totally, for a brief period of time, went insane, basically. It's an insane act. But the way you're telling me with your father, with his writings, and that he talked to the chief, and that he had, he thought about this well in advance, and he turned it into a logical decision. And it's not. It's insanity.
Right.
It really is. But
Yeah.
in his mind, which is the only place it mattered, he turned this into a sane, rational decision. Amanda, listen, when I first got on the fire department, I was telling the chief, I lost my mother in a fire. Not at work. I wasn't there. I was.
God.
Yeah. She burns 55% third-degree burns, and she died a week later in front of me and my brother Michael. She was 48. I had just gotten on the fire department. Now I got to spend the rest of my career losing my mother in a fire.
Wow.
I mean, how do you live? How do you live with that?
Oh my.
And believe me, after that, as I was telling the chief before, I started to think, and I'm never going to be happy again. So what's the point of living? And then I started to formulate, how would I do it? And, you start thinking, you're thinking logically about an illogical decision. And I'm thinking to myself, hey, you know what? I'm in the perfect job if you want to take your life. I could just accidentally get caught in a fire. Nobody will know it's suicide. They'll think I'll die a hero. Right? And this is the way I was actually thinking like this. And I don't know what changed for me. I guess I didn't go further down the rabbit hole. Opportunities came up at work, and I'm like, I just can't do this.
So, Amanda, and I don't want to put you on the spot, but have you reached out to get some help for yourself since all this took place?
I did. This is another very revealing thing about mental health. Is it's not easy to get help. I realized probably within a couple days, I thought, I'm not going to get through this. I don't know how I'm going to get through this, because there are things that I will forever remember. I'm the oldest of his 3 daughters. He was not married. He didn't have a girlfriend. So he lived in an apartment by himself. And I just started digging, like I just started anything that I could get my hands on to read or, look through his phone and figure out like I I saw things that that affected me mentally. A description would be when I walked into his apartment and realized that, wow, like there's a lot of stuff here and there are paths, like this is not normal and it's not healthy. And then where they had to pull up some of the flooring where he was laying. That is a vision that will never leave me. And I'm not in the field of emergency services. I've grown up totally entrenched in it. Everyone in my family was involved in it. From fire to police to EMS. And it was just it was very revealing to me, first of all, that, oh my goodness, like there's not even a body here and this is how much it's affecting me. No wonder he was carrying so much with him. He saw a lot in his lifetime. But also, like, wow, this is really getting to me. I don't know how I'm going to make it through. I need to reach out for help. And literally, when I called to get that help, they told me that I couldn't get in for 6 months at least. And I thought, it is no wonder this becomes a family problem, because if I was not in a good enough place mentally to begin with, what would have happened to me after all of that when I couldn't get any access to help? And I mean, I have good health insurance. It isn't that. It's just that I did not realize the amount of need there is for mental health help. And I did get that help finally. I was able to connect with like an online kind of service. But again, I was only approved for 8 sessions to take place over a couple months. And I thought, this is like a lifetime of work. How are 8 sessions even like helpful?
Amanda, do you mind if I put my 2 cents in?
Go ahead.
Having been through it, I did go for. I knew this was, and even my friends had told me this, Joe, this is too big to handle yourself, and I inherently knew that, and I was at my wit's end of where to go, like you said, and I tried to access, and I did go to a few professionals, but I'm sitting there with someone, and I do believe in therapy and professional help and stuff like that, but I'm sitting in front of somebody that didn't experience this. And they're asking me, well, how do you feel right now? And how do you this? And I'm not trying to make fun of the physical, the mental health industry or anything like that. They're professionals. They want to help, but they haven't been through it. But the best and the cheapest, it was free, was to get to a support group. And I actually took my sister too, and we went to a support group, which is free. And you sit in a room for an hour and a half with a bunch of people. And now I'm like, wow, I'm with, they say suicide is the club that nobody wants to join. But now I'm in the club with other people who have experienced this. And not that it doesn't cure you, but what it is you feel a camaraderie with somebody else's who lost their son, their father, their daughter, and some people it's been 3 years, some people it's been a week. And you find some comfort in that, hearing somebody else. And, now 10 years later, I can look at it a little differently because time does heal. But at that time, I remember thinking a woman and her husband were there. It happened three months prior, and came home from work and their hit the electric garage door open, and the electric garage door went up and their son was hanging in the garage.
Oh my gosh.
I know. And not that that makes you feel better, but you're like, wow, you know what? I lost him, my brother, but I didn't actually have to see it. You know, these people had to actually see it.
Right.
So there was some level of comfort in that.
Right. No, it gives you a perspective, a different
Right. So
perspective
get
to help
get
you cope.
right. Find a support group.
That,
Find a support group.
my biggest thing has been I have never experienced the anger. And I think it's because I was like a mad person looking through any piece of paper I could find writing on, anything that would give me any clues. And those were beyond hard to read, but they were also a source of comfort, if that makes sense, because I kind of then knew some of the whys that people didn't ever, that aren't ever able to find out. I can answer some of those whys. I know why.
Yeah, but when there's this circle that you go in, and then you figure it out, and you go, yeah, but how could he do this? And
Yeah,
I did the same thing. He was struggling with family issues that, and then okay, so that's why he did it. Like, wait a minute. Yeah, but it's still it's still an insane
right,
decision.
right.
And then you read another book and you say, well, it's because he was drinking and family issues and his family. And then you say, oh, you feel a little at peace. And then you go, yeah, but it's still crazy.
It's still
Why? Yeah,
why. Right.
you could
Yeah,
have
I think,
worked it out. There's no figuring that there's this loop that you go through trying to, it sounds like and I'm like that too, a researcher. I like to research
oh
things.
yeah, I am a researcher.
Okay, so you find out that's what I was telling the chief before. You can't, that's the first thing people haven't experienced. His first question they ask is, why did he kill himself? Was he getting divorced? Did he have some financial issue? Was he lonely? But that would mean everybody that's lonely takes their life. Everybody that goes through a divorce takes their life. Everybody that goes through financial issues takes their life. Everybody that was in a war
Right.
takes their life. They don't. But some people, I don't know the mental capacity of everybody of how much you can take. There's a limit you can take. There's a limit I can take. I don't know what it is. Apparently, I haven't reached it yet, and I don't want to. Apparently, he reached it. Does that mean your father was weak? Does that mean my brother was weak? No. Just whatever he experienced in his life, he came to this logical decision, which is vastly illogical and insane. And then
So go ahead, Joe, finish up.
Opportunity made him act on it.
So,
Right.
so here's what I'm hearing. And obviously we have people on here tonight from across the US. Reaching out to a support group seemed to be pretty helpful for Joe. And I'm going to make an assumption here that those support groups, because they're free, probably exist in a lot of communities that
Yes.
we're just not aware of. Okay. And I think I can get access to some resources to be able to help people find that support group if they want it or need it. So I'll make sure that Sam includes my personal email address in the email we send to everybody tomorrow, thanking you for being here tonight, that you can email me directly. And if you're looking for help to find a support group, I'll do what I can to help you find that support group. Because, we've talked about what's led people to die from suicide and what to look for. But the other piece of that is getting help for those people that were left behind. And Amanda, I couldn't agree with you more. I don't know how 8 sessions over 2 months would help you get over that. And to Joe's point, a support group may be the best thing we can find. And I'm willing to do what I have to help people find that support group. So Abby, and I'm sure if I reached out to BHS, you guys would be able to help me find support groups in different areas of the country.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what I was going to say. BHS can certainly help. And then for finding like a therapist, Amanda, I don't know how you went about it. It can be very difficult to figure out. There is a website that I always go to that I can put in the chat, or we can put in the email address. It's psychologytoday.com, and you can search by area, insurance, by specialty, and it's generally very updated. So you can search all the providers and then reach out to who seems like would be a good fit. And that, I've worked in mental health for a long time. I know one of the worst things about mental health is access, and it's a huge barrier. And so that is my most streamlined way of finding providers for people all over the US. And so that is something I'd recommend too. If you are thinking about talking to someone, BHS and FRAP can help connect you. But also, if you want to take it into your own hands, there's this website that is pretty user-friendly.
So Sam, I know you're listening in. Make sure you write down that. We'll put it in the links to the email we send out tomorrow. And then include my personal email address, Sam. And if anybody on here wants to get pointed in a direction for a support group, especially if you've lost a loved one to suicide, if you send me an email, I'll work with all the contacts I have and with Abby at BHS
reach out
with
to
our
me too,
FRAP
Ed,
program,
as needed.
and to get you pointed in the right direction. Our focus tonight initially was all on how to prevent them and what the warning signs were for people that died by suicide. But this discussion's opened up a whole nother side to me. And that's, hey, what about those people that were left behind, and how do we get them help?
Can I say something?
Absolutely, Amanda.
So the one thing I will say that has brought me, that I feel has really helped me begin to heal, is to talk about his story and talk about him as much as I can. I talk more about him and try really to keep a focus on the positives. And then with the not so positive side of the story, I'm trying to turn it into a positive for someone else by me going, and because this was his passion, EMS was his love. And if I can help somebody else, just by me speaking to a group, if I can help somebody else not go through this, or be able to, in me speaking about it, connect with somebody that maybe hasn't made a connection, that has gone through this themselves personally, that has kind of become my motivation. That's become my focus. And it has really helped me begin to heal, because I have to talk it out. I have to get it out in order to heal.
All right. So I want our panelists to take a couple of minutes to think about something, because it'll be the next question. And I want to look, we've been on a little over an hour and a half now. I want to go through the chat log, and I want to look at the Q&A and answer any questions we have. But the next question for our panelists, to give you a couple of minutes to think about it, is, as we approach the conclusion of our event, I invite our panelists to share any final reflections. And I'll hit you with that question here in just a couple of minutes. But I want to go to the Q&A. Francis Ivanko, how is the best way to get a counselor for a peer support team? Our team is having a hard time getting one. Francis, I know you have my email address, and my first thought is the IAFF at their headquarters, because they're big time with the peer support. Abby, do you have any suggestions for that kind of question?
Do you, Chief?
Go ahead.
Chief, would you mind if I mention Jeff Dill and ffbha.org?
Sure, go ahead.
He is amazing, and he is totally focused, yes, on prevention, but more of his work is the survivors. And
Okay.
he's a former firefighter himself. He was a captain in the Palatine Fire Department outside Illinois. It's ffbha.org.
All
He
right.
was an amazing source of for first responders, the families, and also the first responders that are dealing with the loss. Amazing. He just really basically saved my life.
Okay. So I'm going to take a look at let's see. Well, everything in, well, wait a minute. Did something else pop up here? We answered that one. I want to look at the chat and go through the chat log, because a lot of times people will put stuff in the chat log that and not in the Q&A. So, I just want you to know, everybody that joined us initially tonight has stayed with us the entire time. We haven't lost anybody that started with us tonight.
Oh, great.
Just a lot of these are comments and individual. This year I went to therapy after last year we had a fault fire that made no sense to me, and then had 5 or 6 body removals at the end, and it weighed very heavily on me. He knew he needed help at that time, and apparently he reached out and got some help. A lot of just comments. I don't see any real questions. Thanks for sharing your stories. In Canada, we have a couple of modes of training that is great. It's called ASSIST, Applied Suicide Intervention Training, and the Working Minds for First Responders. I may have to check that out myself. Broken or struggling lives don't think in what we consider a rational option or view. That's why we can't comprehend. Here's a point I want to make to everybody's listen, especially those of you who are leaders in volunteer organizations. Okay. So you have a volunteer firefighter, EMT, paramedic, whatever it might be, might even be a dispatcher, and they're part of your fire department, but they also have a job as a police officer. So they're volunteering in your firehouse. They're a police officer by trade. And let's throw in maybe the individual was a veteran who was in Iraq or Afghanistan. You've got an individual that's been slammed 3 different ways. 1 being a volunteer in the emergency services, 2 being a police officer. I'm not saying everybody that fits that bill needs help, but you need to pay more attention to them just because of that, what I'll call the triple threat, if you will. And then you take day-to-day life and throw that in on top of being a volunteer firefighter, being a police officer, and being a war veteran. It's just, we need to pay a little more attention to those folks. And there's a group of people that we always seem to forget, and that's dispatchers. I just read a statistic last week that 24% of the dispatchers surveyed in a survey had contemplated suicide at one time. So that's another group of people that we need to keep our hands on. All right, the rest of them are just comments. I go back to Q&A. I don't see any more Q&A. So now I'm the next question. And Amanda, we're going to start with you. As we approach the conclusion of our event, I invite our panels to share any final reflections with our listeners tonight.
The things that I have kind of, how do I want to put it? I have figured out that, I guess maybe the best way to say this, as a society, we all know the signs of a heart attack. We all know the signs of stroke, but we aren't taught about the red flags of suicide. it isn't a part of the education curriculums. It isn't, it doesn't get crazy amounts of funding. I mean, I know that, you know, there is funding for people to get their ambulance services or fire departments to get support for their people, their staff. But I know that it is not nearly enough. And those are kind of two things that I want to be a part of help changing. So if there's anyone on the call that I guess has any ideas for me on where I could start with that, I would more than welcome it, because again, I'm trying to take my negative and somehow turn it into something positive. So that's kind of my reflection. I want to do what I can to help society in general kind of make a turn, and not only say that let's break the stigma, but let's back it up with actions. You're on mute, Ed.
I keep turning it off because I've been dealing with a sinus issue and I don't want to be sniffling into the speaker.
I
So
totally understand.
I keep turning it off and forget to turn it back the other way. Joe,
Yes.
as we get near the conclusion, share any of your final reflections with our listeners.
Yeah, the word I'd like to put out there is kind of what I said before. Whether you believe it or not, a career in as a first responder, a police officer, or military, you're going to experience broken bones, cuts, bruises. They'll heal, and you'll go on with your job. The mental side of this, no matter whether you got 5 minutes or 50 years as a first responder, you're wounded. On some level, you're wounded. They're not visible wounds like a cut or a broken bone, which you can go to a doctor and say. So you kind of just live with it, and you don't have to just live with it. If the wound, like you said before, Chief, it may not affect you for your whole career, and you may finish your career and never have a PTSD problem or issue with it at all. But on some level, all of us are wounded that way in the first responder world. So when you feel it's getting more and more complicated, the wound, or it's bleeding, reach out to somebody first of all, reach out to somebody that you work with. Not everybody you work with is going to be this wonderful, caring, loving, sympathetic person. But there is somebody in your shift or your crew or even your friends and family that you can talk to. And that's where I say to talk to. And now, of course, you may not share that you've contemplated taking your life, but you say things are really getting bad and I don't know how I'm going to handle it. And then that's where the buddy system works with a friend or someone. Say, listen, we're going to get you through this, whether it's a divorce, financial, whatever the issue is, we're going to get you through this somehow. But you can, and this is the best word I can put out there to any of the firefighters out there who are struggling with something, is you have to put it in your head. It is never an option. Suicide is not on your option list. Working out your marriage, making more money, dealing with a captain you can transfer. No, at no time should that ever be on your option list. You know, and that's not the legacy. You know, when you leave the job, you're going to leave a little bit of a legacy. And it might be because you're an amazing roof guy or an amazing at forcible entry and all that. That's all wonderful. But you don't want your legacy to be suicide. The pain that you're going to cause, you can hear it in Amanda's voice. I heard it in you breaking up before, Chief, and you heard it in my voice for sure. The devastation that you cause and the pain that these people have to live with the rest of their life because of what you thought was a good idea at the time. It's not a good idea. It's never a good idea. You know, we're leaving this life eventually anyway. It's one of the things I couldn't get out of my head is eventually you're going to die anyway. I remember saying this to my brother before the event. Not that I thought that suicide was an issue. I go, you know, what's the rush? We're all gonna pass away at some point. There's no need to rush it. Let nature take its course and time take your life, and then we can all celebrate not celebrate your loss, but we could live with your loss a lot better than we could live with your loss by taking your life. So that's my message.
Thanks, Joe. Abby?
Yeah, building off of what Joe and Amanda said, I think that I think connection and communication and just us being here and talking about it, talking to our loved ones, checking in, like normalizing conversations about how we're doing. I think that that's really the big thing. And like Joe said, you don't have to get super in depth, but finding someone you trust and opening up, it's really important, whether you're contemplating hurting yourself or whether you're someone who's lost someone to suicide. I think in this day and age, we kind of can forget how important connection is. And like the support group, like Joe said, like that made the biggest difference, connecting with other people. So if you take anything from today, take, that having a conversation, talking to someone, it really can make a big difference, no matter what side you're on.
I think Amanda kind of summed this up right with a comment in the chat. The pain doesn't end with suicide. It simply transfers to the people who matter most to you and who you matter most to. That's an excellent way to put it. And to Joe's point, it's not an option. We got to convince people that it's not an option. I wish it was that simple just to say, hey, listen, that's not an option, and it would be removed. But it's a hell of a way. It's a good start anyway, Joe. It's a good start. Look, folks, I want to extend my deepest gratitude to our panelists for their candid and forthright conversation this evening. It's my heartfelt wish that our audience has acquired meaningful understanding on a subject that is often challenging to address. To our listeners, there'll be a short survey at the conclusion of today's episode. Please take the time to complete it. Keep an eye on your email from me that will have your certificate of attendance attached for today's webinar. Again, today's episode will be uploaded to providentins.com, and you'll receive that link in the email within the next day. Please make sure you check your spam or junk email before emailing me that you haven't received your certificate. For those of you who use the webinar as a training for a group of people, when you receive the thank you for joining us email from Sam, there'll be an Excel spreadsheet attached. Please use that to send the names and email addresses to me for certificate. It makes things a whole lot easier for me to copy and paste it from the spreadsheet than me trying to decipher your handwriting. And you can view previous webinars at www.providentins.com using the training resources link in the upper right-hand corner of the page. Please join us on December the 16th when Frank Lieb, retired FDNY officer and now executive director of the First Responder Center for Excellence, will present current and emerging challenges in the fire service. To our audience, I express my appreciation for your presence this evening. I leave you with one final, earnest, and compassionate consideration. If you find yourself struggling with life challenges or work-related issues, I implore you to seek out someone to converse with. Please remember the National Suicide Hotline is available at 988. For our Provident clients, the First Responder Assistance Program can be reached at 855-207-1747. And you can get additional information at www.responders1firstcall.com. If you're a member of the National Volunteer Fire Council, you have access to the National Volunteer Fire Council First Responder Hotline helpline at 800-897-9995. And again, all this will be in the email you get from Sam tomorrow. And by the way, BHS, the same company that manages our FRAP program, manages the helpline for the National Volunteer Fire Council. For members of the International Association of Firefighters, there are a variety of support resources at your disposal. to check out other services BHS offers at their website, www.bhsonline.com. In essence, assistance is available. Yeah, I urge you to initiate a conversation with someone. Until we meet again, stay safe for your family's sake. And let's take care of one another. Good night, all.